Tanya Ryder was born in 1974 when her 19-year-old mother, Nancy, met Tanya's future father, 21-year-old Randy. Although Nancy's parents quickly noticed red flags she ignored, she married Randy anyway. The young man's charm and good looks masked a darker nature. He struggled with substance abuse and had a violent temper. When Tanya was still very young, Randy began beating Nancy, eventually ending their marriage. At one point, his addiction drove him to break into a pharmacy under cover of night to steal medications. He was caught and imprisoned. Tanya wouldn't see her father again until she was a teenager. Before that, she was not allowed to see him, and she always longed for a reunion because life with her mother was far from ideal. Lonely and unhappy, Nancy dated different men and frequently attended parties where alcohol and drugs were used. Sometimes she even hosted such gatherings at home. She continued to choose the wrong men, much like Randy, who abused her. There was rarely food in the house, and Nancy only cooked when she was trying to impress a new boyfriend. Then, unexpectedly, she contacted Randy and asked if he would take Tanya to live with him. Tanya was thrilled, believing this would finally give her a chance at a normal childhood. But she was terribly mistaken. Life with her mother had been marked by neglect. Life with her father meant constant criticism. Though Randy spoiled her with expensive gifts, his new wife turned Tanya into a Cinderella, forcing her to do all the household chores. Despite achieving excellent grades in school and college, Tanya recalls that time with pain as her peers bullied her and treated her with cruelty and selfishness. Unsurprisingly, she developed depression. She initially took medication, but later chose a healthier lifestyle that helped her mental well-being. Despite a difficult childhood, Tanya continued to dream of a loving family and a home of her own. In February 1993, Tanya met Tom Ryder, whom she would marry a few years later. He was 24, she was 18. Tanya was studying in college and working in telemarketing, where Tom also worked. When Tom first spoke to her, he was so nervous. Tanya later said, "It was the little boy inside him who asked me out. It was love at first sight." A year and a half after they met, Tanya and Tom moved into a cheap apartment in a rough neighborhood. They had very little furniture, but they were in love and happy. Over time, they switched jobs several times and eventually found a better place, though they still lived paycheck to paycheck. In 1998, once Tanya was sure of Tom's love, they eloped to Nevada and got married. Although Tanya loved Tom, her mother's toxic relationships made her fear commitment. But after 6 years together, Tom had proven himself, and she knew it was time. The couple was hardworking and never idle. Back in Washington, they launched a construction business, which thrived for 5 years, until a few dishonest homeowners took advantage of their kindness and nearly ruined them. Exhausted emotionally and physically, they shut down the business and decided to start fresh. They began negotiations to buy a home in Maple Valley, King County, Washington, where they planned to settle temporarily. Their plan was to sell that home eventually and use the money to build their dream house. They bought Tanya a new Honda Element, secured a mortgage for the Maple Valley house, and obtained building permits for a property in Shelton. The lot in Shelton overlooked a gorgeous bay where you could spot whales and eagles. Everything seemed to be falling into place, but making their dream come true took all of their time and effort. Like ships passing in the night, they hardly saw each other. Tom barely had time to sleep, and Tanya was working 2 jobs with shifts that rarely aligned with his. They saw each other only during the rare moments when both had a day off. It was a lonely lifestyle, but they were committed to it, hoping it would all be worth it once they were living in their dream home in Shelton. The night before everything changed, the couple spoke briefly. Tanya called Tom a little after 10 p.m. before her night shift. Tom was trying to rest before his own overnight shift when she called. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Sleeping," Tom grumbled. Tanya didn't push the conversation, knowing he needed rest. She hung up and began her night shift at the Fred Meyer supermarket in Bellevue. She would return home after Tom had already started his shift. On Thursday, Tom spent the day working at SoundBuild, a local contractor. After that, he took a side job cutting down blackberry bushes on a real estate agent's property. Then he returned home for a shower before heading to his shift at a pizza place. By the time he returned home again, he was exhausted. Tanya had likely already left for her night shift. At least that was always the case, and it never occurred to Tom that something might be wrong. He woke up at 5 a.m., got ready, and headed to work. The morning passed, but there was still no word from Tanya. Tom figured she wasn't calling because she needed some sleep. At SoundBuild, Tom worked Monday through Friday, so on Saturdays he allowed himself the luxury of sleeping in until 8 a.m. He planned to spend the day battling blackberry bushes. Deeply absorbed in the work, he barely heard the phone ring. It was Tanya's manager from Fred Meyer. Unexpectedly, she asked Tom if everything was okay. "Of course," he replied in confusion. "Why do you ask?" "Well, Tom, Tanya has missed 2 night shifts." Tom was shocked. This was completely unlike Tanya, and he told the woman so. "I know, Tom," she agreed, "but she hasn't shown up for work or called in, and that's not like her at all. I just wanted to make sure everything is okay." Tom couldn't process what he was hearing. He was too exhausted to react quickly. "When did you last see her?" "She left on Thursday morning around 9, the woman said, her voice growing increasingly worried. "And Tom, she's not answering her phone." Tom frantically tried to recall when he had last spoken to her. When had he called her? When had they last talked? Tom promised to find his wife and then contact her boss. He jotted down her number and ran to his car. He called Tanya's cell, no answer. He called again and again, still nothing. After several attempts, he left a voicemail. Then he contacted Tanya's manager at her second job, the Nordstrom Rack department store, and found out she hadn't been scheduled to work Friday, but she was now late for her Saturday shift and still hadn't called in. The manager, like everyone else, knew Tanya would never miss work without letting someone know. If Tanya wasn't at work, she would be home. So where was she? It finally hit Tom. Tanya was missing, and no one had seen her in 36 hours. Tom realized that the lost time would now work against them. Too much had passed already, and their chaotic lives were to blame. While they were both juggling 2 jobs, she had disappeared, and he had just kept working, assuming everything was fine. Tom returned home and searched every room. He called out to his wife in vain. She wasn't there. Panic rising, he jumped back in the car and retraced the route she normally took to work. He also called 911 and asked to be connected with the highway patrol. They told him there were no reports of an accident involving Tanya Ryder or her vehicle. He called local hospitals. No one had seen her. What else could he do? He called 911 again. He explained that his wife had been missing since Thursday. The operator promised to send an officer to meet Tom and take a missing persons report. Tom said he would meet the officer outside Tanya's workplace. When the officer arrived at Nordstrom Rack, Tom explained the situation. The officer asked when Tom had last spoken to his wife and whether there had been any signs she might have wanted to leave him. "No," said Tom. "It was normal for her to hear my voice and hang up." "So she just hung up?" the officer asked, wondering if Tanya might have been angry. "We've been married a long time," said Tom. "She's mad at me half the time." "Yeah, we argue. We're married." "So you're sure she didn't just leave you? Maybe she'd had enough." Tom knew Tanya hadn't left him. She would never do that without a reason. Besides, she would have taken some or all of their money. But all she had was the Nordstrom Visa card. The officer asked where Tanya had last been seen, then stepped outside to call the station. When he returned, the officer said, "We found surveillance footage showing Tanya getting into her car after her shift and heading onto the highway. But my sergeant informed me this is where our involvement ends. You'll need to contact a different department because once she left work, she left our jurisdiction." "So you're telling me I have to call 911 again when I get home?" Tom asked, incredulous. The officer confirmed it. Tom had to call 911 again to be connected with the appropriate department. Back home, Tom called 911 again, but the operator didn't seem particularly concerned about the missing woman. "Did you check the hospitals and jails?" the operator asked. Tom explained that the hospitals were his first call. He hadn't checked the jails. If Tanya had been arrested, she would have called him for bail. "You can't file a missing persons report until you've checked the jails," the operator said coldly and hung up. Tom was furious. He ran upstairs and searched online for jail contact info. He checked every local jail's online database. No record of Tanya Ryder. Tom called 911 again and told the same operator his wife was missing and not in jail. "Did you call her friends and family?" the operator asked. Why did every call come with a new task, Tom thought. He said, "She doesn't have many friends and is estranged from her family. I can't take a report until you contact her family," said the operator. "She's an adult. She can go wherever she wants." "You're saying that if she's an adult, she has the right to die?" "Call back when you've contacted her family," the operator said and hung up. Tom called Tanya's relatives. Just as he expected, none had heard from her in a long time. Holding back rage, he called 911 again. "Has she ever had mental health issues?" the operator asked. Tom replied, "She's mentally healthy. She had depression, but she's managing it. What medication is she on?" "None. She treats it with diet and organic foods." "Then she doesn't meet our criteria for a missing persons case," said the operator bluntly. Tom was stunned. His wife had been gone for days. No one had seen her, and she didn't meet the criteria? The operator, irritated, explained that his wife was an adult, free to go wherever she wanted and not obligated to report to anyone. Tired of fighting the cold bureaucracy, Tom tried contacting the media. A reporter showed more concern than the operator, but said they couldn't air the story without a case number. Tom explained that the police didn't consider the case worth opening. The reporter suggested calling the sheriff's office to confirm the criteria and promised to follow up. Tom dialed 911 once more. A different operator answered this time. Tom went through everything again. Fortunately, this operator was more compassionate. He took down Tanya's and her car's details, assigned a case number, and promised to send an officer. When the officer arrived, he asked the standard questions. What was Tanya wearing? What car did she drive? Tom insisted the officer check their home. While they waited for a warrant, the officer said he'd forward the info to the department, and maybe, just maybe, the case would be investigated. But at least now there was a case number. Tom could finally call the reporter back, who promised to contact the sheriff's office. Maybe that would finally push the police to take action. Who knows? Either way, a detective showed up at Tom's home. She had been assigned to the case. She asked for the couple's bank records. Tom said he had access to their joint account, but not the Nordstrom Visa card Tanya had with her. He couldn't access the bank statements yet. He was having trouble with his login. He gave the detective all the information he had, begging her to follow every possible lead. She wrote it all down and left. Tom didn't know how to cope with the anxiety. He kept himself busy with chores and wandered around the house hoping to see Tanya come home. On Monday, overwhelmed, he got in the car and just drove, lost in thought. He called her again. This time there was no ringing. It went straight to voicemail. That meant her phone was off. His whole body trembled. He couldn't move. It felt like part of him had died. He was consumed by primal fear. When he could finally think straight, he called the detective. Maybe there was news. She asked suddenly, "Does Tanya know anyone in Yakima?" "No," Tom replied, a flicker of hope rising inside. "Why?" "We got a tip about a car matching hers in the Fred Meyer parking lot in Yakima." Tom was ready to believe Tanya had left him, as long as she was alive. But after thinking it over for a moment, he asked the detective again why she believed it could be Tanya's car. She replied that a Ryder family bank card had been used there to purchase fuel. Tom's heart sank. He was the one who had used the card to buy gas that day. Tom asked why they were checking a card that was at home with him and not with his missing wife. The detective replied as if he had told her he didn't have access to their joint account. Tom said, of course he had access to the joint account, but not to the Nordstrom Visa card. He tried to speak gently so as not to anger the detective, who nevertheless blamed him for the misunderstanding. She again asked him for a printout of the account activity, and again he had to explain that he couldn't provide it. Tom began to feel like no one was listening to him, or that the police didn't really care about Tanya's disappearance. He didn't understand why the police were doing nothing and just taking their frustration out on him. He decided to push them into action. The man started handing out flyers and doing everything he could to keep the case from being closed at the first opportunity. He announced a $25,000 reward. At 8 a.m. on Thursday, Tom was driving on autopilot from exhaustion and lack of sleep. A detective called and asked him to answer what were supposedly routine questions. Tom agreed to come into the station. There, the police suddenly suggested he take a polygraph test. Tom gladly agreed. Finally, they would see that he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance and would begin a real investigation. But during the test, he saw disgust on the faces of the detectives and the polygraph examiner, as if they already believed he was guilty. Was she okay the last time you saw her? Did you upset her in any way? Have you ever hit her? The examiner pressed, which only upset and irritated Tom more. Why were they more interested in him than in Tanya? After a series of questions, the examiner left the room, allowing Tom to look around and collect his thoughts. But then the door opened again, and Tom recognized a detective he'd seen before. This time, 2 other officers were with him. Tom thought, what's going on? 3 against 1? He noticed the detective holding a map that showed a road Tom knew well. He couldn't understand why the detective just stood in the doorway, saying nothing. He simply stared at Tom. Suddenly he asked, did Tom know what a cell phone ping was? But he didn't wait for an answer. The detective showed Tom the map and explained that all the recent calls made to Tanya's phone had gone through the same cell tower. For the past 8 days, all calls had pinged the same tower. They were watching Tom's reaction. Time seemed to slow down. Tom barely felt present in his own body. He was tired of waiting for the next words. "And," the detective said, "we found her car," then paused again. Tom couldn't take it anymore. "And," he repeated, "we found her car in a ravine. She's still inside." Tom's heart pounded wildly. Why was the detective being so vague? Is she alive? "We don't know," said the detective. "They're still trying to reach her, and then she'll be taken to the hospital." It turned out that investigators had mistakenly assumed only Tanya Ryder had access to the couple's joint account, and the activity on it led them to believe she had run away. Once detectives realized that Tom also had access, they were able to obtain the data on Tanya's cell phone location, which ultimately led them to the spot where her car had veered off the road. Because of the misunderstanding about account access, the sheriff's office had no valid reason to request a warrant from the phone company for 4 days after Tanya was reported missing. Her mobile carrier, Verizon Communications, refuses to release such information unless the police promise to provide a warrant within 24 hours. If we had gained access to the phone data earlier in Tanya Ryder's case, she would have been found on Monday, September 24th, not the 27th, admitted King County Sheriff Sue Rahr. When Tanya regained consciousness in the hospital and saw Tom, her expression softened and her eyes filled with tears. She was alive, and the people closest to her, Tom and her mother Nancy, were there. It seemed the worst was over, but it wasn't time to relax just yet. As it turned out, Tanya's body had been severely injured in the crash. Her bones were broken, her lungs were damaged, and she had gone several days without food or water. Tanya was transferred to the intensive care unit and placed in a medically induced coma. Doctors faced a difficult decision: amputate Tanya's leg or attempt a fasciotomy, a complex and not always successful procedure. Fortunately, another miracle awaited Tanya, and the procedure was successful. There were still long months and even years of recovery and physical therapy ahead, but she was alive and grateful for the support of the man who never stopped trying to find her. The cause of the crash was never determined, although both the police and Tanya's husband believe she may have simply fallen asleep at the wheel due to her exhausting schedule working 2 jobs. Tanya Ryder decided to learn from her experience and share her story with others by writing a book in which she described everything she went through during those 8 helpless days in the ravine. Despite everything that happened, she maintained a positive outlook on life.